So yesterday, Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, spoke to Congress and said some interesting things about the importance of addressing inequality in America. Let's talk about that in today's video. If you're new to this channel, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video and subscribe to the channel and maybe even click that little bell that will notify you when I post a new video, because I do try to post pretty frequently. So yesterday, Jerome Powell, who's chairperson of the Federal Reserve, spoke to Congress and had some interesting things to say. He obviously addressed the concerns about inflation that are being raised. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because I've already made a couple videos about that, and I'll link them below. But what's especially interesting to me is he emphasized to lawmakers the importance of addressing inequality. Now remember, Jerome Powell is the chairman who was appointed by Donald Trump to replace Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen, of course, is now the Secretary of the Treasury in the Biden administration. So you would think that Jerome Powell would be more of a partisan Republican. Well, partisan Republican or not, Jerome Powell is first an economist. And economists are driven by data. And the data says some interesting things about inequality. Most importantly is that the huge growth in inequality in the United States has been a burden on the American economy and has hurt growth of our gross domestic product. How is that possible? The Republicans for years have been telling us that by giving money to the rich through tax cuts and other incentives, that the wealth would trickle down and benefit everybody throughout society. Well, the problem that economists are aware of, but that Republicans seem to be ignoring, is the idea of marginal value. Let me explain marginal value to you for a second by using the analogy of a bag of potato chips. Boy, when I open that bag of potato chips, that first chip tastes fantastic. Then the second chip, it also tastes pretty good. And the third chip, still pretty good. But as you start eating more and more, they're not quite as exciting. And after you've eaten maybe the 20th or 30th or maybe even the 40th chip, I have to admit, well, not only are you not so enamored with the chips anymore, but they're actually making you sick to your stomach, so you want to stop. Well, that's a perfect example of marginal value. What marginal value means is as you consume each unit of something, whether it be a chip or whether it be a mansion, the first one is going to have the highest value to you. And as you consume more and more and more, they're going to have less and less value going forward until ultimately you actually don't want any more because you can't use them. And that's why really our economy would benefit from spreading around the wealth to everybody rather than just to a few of the very super rich. I mean, how many yachts can Jeff Bezos buy? How many trips into space can he and his buddies buy? And I don't want to pick on Jeff Bezos. I mean, there are a lot of good things I could say about Jeff Bezos. It's just that he's incredibly rich. And in his lifetime, he could never spend all the money that he's got. But for someone who's, say, middle class, buying that first house, well, that's a pretty big deal. And especially with the cost of housing increasing, it's going to be harder and harder for people in the middle class to do so. So spreading around the wealth to everybody is only going to help the economy. And it gets to be even more important when you get to people in the lowest income brackets, because for them, they have essentials, things like food that they have to buy, clothing that they have to buy, cars that they have to buy. So rather than just taking money and stacking it up God knows where, for example, in artwork that contribute nothing to the economy, by spreading around the money to everybody, it generates more economic activity that obviously is a good thing for the economy. But wait a minute, you might say, what about all the charitable work that is being done by the super wealthy? I mean, think of the Gates Foundation or all the work that's being done by Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. Well, yes, that's all well and good. But think of it this way. As a society, we can decide how we're going to spend our money, as a society as a whole. Or we can allow a few of the super rich to decide how it's going to be spent. Well, even if the super rich are very charitable and very generous and very kind people, their views won't necessarily reflect the views of society as a whole. That's why we have, in theory, a democratic government. So the question is, do you really want to hand over these decisions just to the very few who are going to be making all the decisions for you? Or do you want these decisions to be made by society as a whole through the democratic process? That's the difference between people paying taxes or people making huge charitable contributions. I, for one, think that the very wealthy should pay more in taxes, which would allow society as a whole to make decisions about how we're going to spend the money. And a lot of the ways that we're going to spend money as a society would be the type of thing that would increase equality across the board. Things like, say, infrastructure investment, which would increase blue-collar jobs. Things like child care support, which would make it so that people are able to go to work without having to worry about making sure their children are cared for. Things like free college education, which will actually increase the value of the workforce in the United States. All these things are possible if we tax the rich. And as Jerome Powell pointed out, inequality is not something that the Federal Reserve can address. Inequality is something that only Congress can address. And the fact is, it was something created by the policies that Congress put in place. So if you're concerned about this as I am, please contact your congressman and senator to let them know that you want them to pass legislation that will tax the rich and distribute funds in ways that will benefit everybody. It's not just nice, it's just good economics, as Jerome Powell pointed out. So if you enjoyed this video, maybe you could like it, subscribe to this channel, and maybe even click that little bell that will notify you when I post something new, because I do post pretty frequently. And I will see you in the next video, and let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.